Awesome.
We have here with us Swami Medhananda, more popularly known as so he's very known for and he's very known for that. So Medhananda Maharaj became an ordained sannyasi of the Ramakrishna order in February of 2020. He received his PhD in philosophy from the University of Southern California, Berkeley.
University of California, Berkeley. You said Southern California. It's UC Berkeley, yeah. Don't worry about it. Just I'm a Hindu chaplain now at University of Southern California. You threw in Southern into my PhD, but no worries, no worries. No problem.
He holds faculty and advisory positions in several prestigious universities that include UCLA. He is also the Hindu chaplain at UCLA and the University of Southern. His scholarly work is outstanding with many honors and awards. He has written several articles and 4 books. His recent book is just out, printed by the
Cambridge University Press.
And he'll be signing this at the end of the talk. Those of you who want to buy it and get it signed, can contact me. I put back after the talk, after the Q&A, to sign it for those of you who want to buy it.
Thank you. Can you turn down the temperature? It's a little stuffy. Yeah. It got him like Om Asato Ma Sadgamaya Tamaso Ma Jyotir Gamaya Mrityor Ma Amritam Gamaya Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om, lead us from the transient to the eternal. Lead us from darkness to light. Lead us from death to immortality. Om, peace, peace, peace. Good evening, everyone. Nice to see you. Nice to be back in Houston. I came last year, and I'm happy to be back again. And nice to see some familiar faces and some new faces as well. So, yes, my latest book, it just was published a couple months ago. And I thought I would start by just giving a brief overview of it. I was faced with a tricky, difficult task to write about, somewhat comprehensively about karma and rebirth in Hinduism, but within 30,000 words. Now, for those of you who are writers will know 30,000 words is not very much. It was a very strict limit. I couldn't even go 5 words over 30,000. So that's why the book ended up being very thin. And I'm only the author, I'm not the publisher. I wish that the publisher had published the book in kind of a smaller format so that it wouldn't look so thin and the font is kind of too small. So these are some of the complaints of the author. If the publisher's out there listening to me, it would be nice if it was a little pocket edition, go into like 130, 140 pages. But anyway, this is what we have. I hope the content is good. That's what I had control over. Don't ask me about the cover. That's also purely from the publisher's end, the bland clouds. And so, because it's part of a book series, it's called Cambridge Elements in Global Philosophy of Religion. Okay, Cambridge University Press has this series in topics in philosophy of religion relating to different global spiritual traditions. And they asked me to write this on karma and rebirth in Hinduism. And all the books in the same series kind of go by the same format. So that's just some background. Now, What is unique about the book? Well, let me explain it chapter by chapter. It has 5 chapters, okay? And in the first chapter, I explain the earliest and most important scriptural sources for Hindu teachings on karma and rebirth, okay? And the 2 oldest Upanishads, the 2 oldest Hindu scriptures, period, which talk about karma and rebirth in a clear way, are Brihad Aranyaka Upanishad and Chandogya Upanishad. And then, as many of you probably know, Bhagavad Gita is full of references to karma and rebirth. One of my favorite references is in chapter 2. Many of you, if you grew up in India, you might have been asked to memorize this verse. Beautiful verse from chapter 2. Vasam sijidnani yatha vihaya navani grinnati naro parani tatha sharirani vihaya jidnan anyani sanyati navani dehi. And the verse means, just as at the end of a long day, we cast off our worn out clothes and then we put on a new set of clothes, just so the embodied soul casts off one physical body once it gets used out or kind of worn out and old, and assumes a new body, a new physical body, okay? So that's the doctrine of karma and rebirth. So that chapter 1 kind of discusses some of the details of the scriptural references, the earliest scriptural references to karma and rebirth. Okay. Chapter 2 does something interesting. Many of us, as Hindus even, I mean, let alone non-Hindus, but Hindus themselves, many of them think that there is one Hindu doctrine of karma and rebirth, that philosophers or scholars call this a monolithic conception of karma and rebirth. Monolithic means karma and rebirth mean one thing across Hindu traditions. But that's actually not accurate, okay? Because Hinduism is a vast tradition, full of different spiritual traditions, different philosophies, different religious views. And if you go really deep into the literature on the topic, what you'll find is that different traditions within Hinduism have subtly different conceptions of karma and rebirth. There are, of course, commonalities. So we can talk about some of the commonalities, but we'll also find that there are some differences across these traditions within Hinduism, okay? Like one example, and we'll get to that hopefully in the talk. Who or what exactly is it that reincarnates? This is a very fundamental question. What is the reincarnating entity? Within Hinduism, there are multiple answers to the question. We'll find that in a second, okay? Okay, so think about it for yourselves. Just ask yourselves, well, who is it? What is it that reincarnates? See what answer you give. We'll get to some of the answers. Okay, so chapter 2 kind of discusses some of the many answers to fundamental questions about karma and rebirth within Hinduism, okay? So the chapter is called Nuances of Karma and Rebirth in Classical and Modern Hindu Traditions. And then another thing that I do in that chapter is I talk about modern Hindu thinkers. One of them, the one that we may be most familiar with, is, of course, Swami Vivekananda. So Sri Ramakrishna, Swami Vivekananda, Sri Aurobindo, Sarvapalli Radhakrishnan, Paramahamsa Yogananda, Prabhupada in the ISKCON tradition. There's so many, right? So many modern Hindu thinkers. And they've also spoken about karma and rebirth. Now notice, my book is Karma and Rebirth in Hinduism, not Karma and Rebirth in the Ramakrishna Vivekananda tradition. That's a very important difference. So this book has to be comprehensive and it should discuss Hindu traditions other than the Ramakrishna Vivekananda one. That's why I talk about so many other traditions as well. I talk about Ramana Maharshi, I talk about Nisargadatta Maharaj, and so many other Hindu figures in different contexts. Okay, Abhedananda ji also. So what we'll find is also, if you look at the book, we're not going to talk about this in the talk today, I don't have time, is that sometimes the modern Hindu thinkers explain karma and rebirth and justify these doctrines in ways that are very different from the way that classical Hindu thinkers, like Shankaracharya, like Ramanuja and others, talked about the doctrine. Why? For historical reasons. Because think about the historical context of these modern Hindu thinkers. They were writing during British colonial rule. Swami Vivekananda, 1863 to 1902, and so on. Sri Aurobindo, all of them are writing during British colonial times. What does it mean? It means that they are confronted with very aggressive Christian missionaries who are set who are set on trying to convert Hindus to Christianity, right? And so now suddenly, for the first time in a long time, Hindus have to defend their religion against these Christian missionaries. And at the same time, another very important historical development is that science has developed rapidly in this time. And Darwin's theory of evolution came up in the middle of the 19th century. New technologies, so many things are coming up. And so because of scientific inquiry, there are all these doubts coming up. You know, how do you reconcile your doctrine of karma and rebirth with the fact that the human population has been exponentially increasing in the past few decades? This is a very important objection, for instance. And so now these modern Hindu thinkers have to answer these kind of questions, these objections that were never really raised in earlier times. In earlier times in India, there were just Hindus. And so, and even Buddhists believed in karma and rebirth. So nobody's arguing with each other. They all accepted karma and rebirth. Jainas accepted karma and rebirth. Buddhists believe in karma and rebirth. Hindus believe in karma and rebirth. But now suddenly when you're confronted with Christian missionaries, with Muslims, then you have to defend these doctrines against skeptics, against critics. So they make some different arguments. So I talk about those in chapter 2. Now, chapters 3 and 4 of the book they look at some of the most important arguments in support of karma and rebirth. That's chapter 3. And then I look at, in chapter 4, some of the most important arguments, objections against the doctrines of karma and rebirth. I just mentioned one of them. How do you reconcile the doctrines of karma and rebirth with the fact of this exponential population growth of human beings, for instance? Okay, and hopefully we'll talk about some of the Hindu answers to these objections. And then finally, a brief chapter 5 talks about the relevance of karma and rebirth to debates in contemporary philosophy. I look at why are these doctrines still relevant now? And how do these doctrines help us to answer very, very urgent and important and very current philosophical questions? I talk about, for instance, environmental ethics. This is a hot topic now. Why should we be conscientious about preservation of trees and crops? Why are more and more people becoming vegetarian? What might the doctrines of karma and rebirth have to do with these kinds of ethical questions concerning the environment and animal cruelty, how we should treat non-human animals, and so on? These are all very important questions, okay? So I talk about those kinds of things in chapter 5. So that's the overall gist of the book. And many of you might be wondering, what is the audience for this book? Well, it's an academic book, okay? One of the tasks that was given to me was to write it in a way that is accessible to specialists, but also non-specialists, to both. So I have to please the scholars by giving sufficient references. You'll find about 11 pages of references to books and articles. So I'm trying to discuss all of the major scholarship. At the same time, it's meant to be an introductory overview. So this is not supposed to be highly technical. So hopefully all of you will be able to understand it. You have to read it slowly in this Instagram age. People want little sound bites and this and that. So you may have to read several sentences a couple times, but that's good for you. It's like eating your broccoli. Okay. I'm not selling my book very well. Anyway. So the other thing is, look, you're all Hindu, or most of you are Hindu. You might be thinking, well, what's the point? I already believe in the doctrines. Yes, that's true. But in Christianity, there is an exercise called faith-seeking understanding. Faith-seeking understanding. It means I already believe so-and-so doctrine. I believe, like a Christian will say, I believe that Christ is the Son of God. But even then, it's very important to reflect on those doctrines. You might already accept them. But what do those doctrines entail? What do they really mean? How do you respond to doubts about those objections? Right? These are very important things. That's what's called faith-seeking understanding. It might be that you believe in karma and rebirth, but then what happens? Suddenly something tragic happens. You lose a child. You're diagnosed with cancer. Something horrible happens. God forbid. Knock on wood. But then suddenly your belief in God, your belief in karma and rebirth, they can become shaken. They can get shaken. And then you start wondering, wait a minute, how do I really believe in karma and rebirth? You see, unless you have the direct experience, we don't have 100% certainty about these doctrines. We have faith. So to strengthen that faith, knowing the arguments for, knowing the arguments against are very helpful. In Vedanta, this is called manana. In Vedanta, the main sadhana is Shravana, Manana, Nididhyasana. You learn about the main doctrines of Vedanta from the scriptures, from the Upanishads, from the Bhagavad Gita, from the Brahma Sutra, from the teachings of the great saints like Sri Ramakrishna and so on. But then you have to reflect on those teachings, manana. After Shravana comes manana. Reflect deeply on the teachings and remove any doubts you might have and strengthen your faith in those doctrines. Then the third sadhana becomes nididhyasana. You have to internalize those teachings and try to practice them in your own life. The most important thing of all is practice. But in order to practice a doctrine properly, to engage in spiritual practice, you have to have a clear framework, a clear spiritual framework. Okay? So we'll talk about both today. We're going to talk about some philosophical issues concerning karma and rebirth, but ultimately I will come back to practice, because for all of us at the end of the day, practice is the most important thing. How do the doctrines of karma and rebirth really affect our day-to-day life? How can they enrich our day-to-day life, our day-to-day spiritual practice? These are some of the questions I want to address. First of all, one thing that you might not be aware of, which is quite interesting, is that a few years ago, there was a Pew research study done. And they asked Americans throughout the country, do you believe in karma and rebirth? And an amazingly high number of Americans said yes. 1/3. 1/3 of Americans. That's an extremely high number, because it means that these are not just Hindu and Buddhist and Jaina Americans. There are some Christians out there. There are some Muslims out there. There are some Jews out there, Jewish Americans, who are also, even though their Orthodox religions don't believe in these doctrines, they intuitively somehow, they instinctively believe these doctrines. This is very interesting. That there's something intuitive and something appealing about the doctrines of karma and rebirth that transcends even cultural and spiritual boundaries. Okay? So what I want to try to cover today in the brief time that I have about, 45 minutes, and then we'll open it to Q&A. We'll have a good half hour for Q&A, and so I'd love to hear from you all. So I'm sure you have your own ideas and questions. So one thing I want to talk about is how karma and rebirth, Hindus don't ask you to believe these doctrines on faith, okay? They're not just dogmas that we should uncritically accept. These are doctrines that we should think about for ourselves. We should weigh the arguments for and against, and then we should decide, is it rational to accept these doctrines? In my book, I was encouraged by the publisher, thankfully. Don't just write an introduction. They said you should take an argumentative stand. You should have a stand. What was my argument? The main argument in this book is that it is reasonable for us to believe in the doctrines of karma and rebirth. Okay? After weighing the arguments for and against, this is the conclusion that I come to. And so that's another kind of value of the book. If you look at it, I hope to persuade you. If you're on the fence about it, if you don't believe the doctrines, I want to try to persuade you to accept the doctrines of karma and rebirth. Okay. And then finally, as I said, I want to come to very concretely, how do these doctrines of karma and rebirth help us in our spiritual life? Okay, if at all. So first of all, what exactly are these doctrines of karma and rebirth? Fundamentally, the doctrine of karma is a doctrine that we reap what we sow. This is a common expression. That's the core of the doctrine of karma. We reap what we sow. Okay? And I think most Hindus, if they're asked what is karma, they might say something like that. We reap what we sow. But now, if we go a little bit deeper, what we'll find is in the literature, the Hindu literature on the topic, even in the classical literature, you're going to find two fundamentally different ways that Hindu thinkers have explained the mechanism by which we reap what we sow. So if you ask the question, so karma means we reap what we sow. Then the next question, well, how do we reap what we sow? Hindu texts and Hindu figures give two different answers. One explanation of how we reap what we sow is psychological. Another explanation of how we reap what we sow is what I would call metaphysical. Okay? So let's take them one at a time. What is the psychological explanation of how we reap what we sow? Simple idea. The idea is that, and Swami Medhananda talks about this in Karma Yoga. He says, look, anytime we act, anytime we engage in any kind of action, what happens? That act produces samskaras. latent mental impressions lodged in the unconscious. Now, what happens when we have samskaras? Ultimately, in the future, those samskaras will get triggered, they'll get activated, and they'll lead us to engage in the same behavior in the future. And then what happens as a result? Finally, those actions form into habits. And then what Swamiji says is, Swami Vivekananda says that, what is character? Every one of us has a character, a moral character, good, bad, mediocre, whatever it is. Character is nothing but a bundle of habits. Character is nothing but repeated habits. This is one of Swami Vivekananda's definitions of character, actually. Okay. And then when we act on the basis of our character. So it's a kind of cycle that's created. We act, that those acts create samskaras, whether good or bad. Those samskaras form into habits. Those habits form our character. And our actions flow from our character, which means we can change our character, we can reform our character by engaging in different actions. If I have a bad character, I can become good by engaging in good actions, which will then form into good habits, which will then produce a good character. So we should never think that the doctrines of karma and rebirth are fatalistic, that we're doomed to be good or we're doomed to be bad, or that, there's a kind of determinism here. Not in that sense. Okay, we can always change our character. That's the psychological explanation of how we reap what we sow. If I do something good, it produces a good samskara, which will make me more prone to engaging in that good action in the future. And the same thing goes for bad actions. So in that sense, we reap what we sow. Metaphysically speaking, there's a totally different explanation. And this is also endorsed by Hindu thinkers. What do they say? They say that a good act generates what's called punya. Punya, P-U-N-Y-A. This is probably the more common way of understanding the doctrine of karma. Any good action generates punya. What is punya? Where is punya? Is it on the table? No, it's a metaphysical entity. It's supersensuous. That's why I'm calling it a metaphysical explanation. This is not something we can't observe papa and punya under a microscope. But it's there. It exists. So every good act produces punya. That punya produces favorable circumstances in the future for us. What do I mean in the future? It could be later in this life, or it could be in the next birth, in a future lifetime. But eventually, we will reap good results from the good action that we engage in now. And the opposite is also true. If we do something bad from an ethical standpoint, an ethically bad action, if I do something selfish, cruel, what happens? That produces the opposite, which is called papa, P-A-P-A. What happens as a result of papa? That papa leads to unfortunate, unfavorable circumstances in the future, either later in this life or in a future life. Okay? Good action leads to punya, leads to favorable circumstances in the future. Bad action leads to papa, leads to unfavorable circumstances in the future. This is the metaphysical explanation of how we reap what we sow. Now you might ask, well, which one should we accept? I think most Hindus will say you accept both. You should accept both. They are not mutually exclusive, these two explanations, the psychological explanation and the metaphysical explanation. And I bet many of you, even though you've believed in the doctrines of karma and rebirth for a long time, you may not have clearly been able to distinguish these two different metaphysical and psychological explanations of the doctrine of karma, right? So this is why reflection, deep thinking about these doctrines are very helpful. Both of them are true, okay? Now, another common idea about the Hindu doctrine of karma is that it's basically about reward and punishment. I do something good, God rewards me through this doctrine of karma, gives me a lollipop, and I'm happy like a child. And I do something bad, and God punishes me. And I cry, and I'm sad, right? This is a very common mainstream understanding of the doctrine. It's so mainstream that it comes up in popular culture. I'll give you one example. Some of you, I'm sure, have watched the show Big Bang Theory. And the actor playing the Indian character, Kunal Nair, he used to come to my classes in Hollywood, he and his wife, Neha Kapoor. And so I met them, and there's a funny scene in Big Bang Theory where Leonard Hofstadter, one of the main characters, he's in love with Penny, but he's kind of cowardly and he's afraid to confess his love for her. And so she's dating somebody else, and he tries to sabotage Penny's date with this guy that he's jealous of. So Leonard says, I deliberately tried to sabotage Stuart's date with Penny. Rajesh Kutrapali, the Indian character, he says, of course you feel terrible. You completely screwed up your karma, dude. And then Sheldon, the brilliant physicist, Sheldon says, you don't really believe in that superstition, do you? And then Rajesh says, it's not superstition. It's practically Newtonian. For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. Leonard pretends to be a friend and acts like a two-faced, and then there's an expletive here. Therefore, he is reborn as a banana slug. It's actually a very elegant system. You know, what goes around comes around. So this is a very common understanding of karma and rebirth. In fact, one of the questions that kind of terrifies people, especially Hindus who believe in it, is it possible I'll be reborn as a tree or as a plant or as a slug? You know. And actually, again, this is something I talk about briefly in chapter 2 of the book, if you're interested. Is it possible to regress from a human birth to a non-human animal birth or to a plant birth, to an insect, for instance, or something like that? The answer depends on whom you're asking. Different Hindu figures give different answers to this question. It's very interesting. Do you know what Swami Vivekananda's answer was? Yes, of course. If you do bestial things, you'll be born as a beast. So behave like a human being, for goodness sakes. That's his thing. Now, interestingly, many people don't know this. Another brother disciple of Swamiji's, Abhedanandaji, he wrote books, actually, on karma and rebirth. His view is the opposite of Swamiji's. He simply denies the possibility that we can be, once we attain a human birth, it's not possible to regress to a non-human animal birth. And I think part of the reason, I don't know what the reason is, he didn't explain why, but so actually many people don't know that even within our tradition, there are some discrepancies, divergences. And between Swami Vivekananda and Swami Abhedanandaji, there's a difference of opinion on this question of whether we can regress from a human to a non-human animal birth. I think maybe Abhedanandaji, because he was working in the West, like Swamiji, that he felt that if you taught the traditional Hindu doctrine that a bad person can be reborn as a mosquito, like a Hitler or somebody can be, maybe he's flying around, who knows, that some people might be either find it really weird, off-putting, or like as a kind of like a black mark against Hinduism, And so in that age of Christian missionaries and whatever, Abhedanandaji kind of projected a more polished, rational form of Hinduism, and he felt that it's not gonna help the cause of Hinduism to teach the doctrine that we can regress from a human to a non-human animal birth. Maybe, I'm just speculating that that's one possibility. But in any case, we do find these divergences. And then some other Hindu figures, modern Hindu figures, Sarvepalli Radhakrishnan, many of you know, he was the president of India, a great philosopher, and Sri Aurobindo, they have a kind of middle position to some extent, because what they say is, it's almost never the case that we regress. Once we reach a human birth, it almost never happens that we regress to a non-human animal birth or to a plant birth or an insect. But it's possible. Theoretically, it's possible. We can't rule it out, but it almost never happens. So you see how that's a kind of middle position. Okay, so that's just to give you a taste. Now, but coming back to Big Bang Theory and the mainstream view. The mainstream view is karma is about reward and punishment. Now, the thing is, that's not a very spiritual doctrine. You see, the idea that God is just a great judge up there in the sky and we do something good and he rewards us with a lollipop, we do something bad and he slaps us on the wrist or he punches us in the face. This is, how do we make spiritual progress? You see, how does that help us? Now, some great modern Hindu figures, and I include Sri Ramakrishna, Swami Vivekananda, Sri Aurobindo, Radhakrishna and others, what they say is, this doctrine of karma, it's not primarily about reward and punishment. That is not the overarching aim. We do reap what we sow. That's fundamental to the doctrine of karma. But what is the purpose of reaping what we sow? What is the deep lesson that we can learn from the doctrines of karma and rebirth? The answer is, we can grow morally and spiritually. We evolve morally and spiritually. So I would contrast this reward and punishment model of karma, what we can call, using slightly more technical language, the retributive doctrine of karma. Are you following? It's not a doctrine of retribution. I do something good, I'm rewarded. I do something bad, I'm punished. It's a doctrine of evolution. It's the evolutionary doctrine of karma. Okay? So just keep this in mind. This is very important. We have to distinguish these two different ways of thinking about karma. We can think about it as a retributive doctrine of reward and punishment, or we can think of it as an evolutionary doctrine. As an evolutionary doctrine, what it says is, as Sri Ramakrishna used to say, if you eat a chili, won't your tongue burn? Swapna Ma asked me for my dietary preferences, and I told her, no jhal. Jhal in Bengali means no green and red chili, because I have really bad reactions if I eat anything spicy. So anyway, but so Sri Ramakrishna knew this well. I said, if you eat a chili, won't your tongue burn? Mine burns very badly, right? So this is the reap what we sow theory, right? But at the same time, what is the purpose? What happens when I eat the chili and my tongue burns? In the future, will I jump the moment I see a chili and put it in my mouth? Probably not. So the point of feeling that pain, that burning sensation in the tongue is, ooh, I better not do that again in the future, right? Now, what happens when I do that? That means that I'm avoiding things that are harmful to me. So in a moral sense, the whole purpose of the doctrine of karma is to foster our moral and our spiritual growth. That means if I do something bad, yes, I will have to face the consequences. But it's not punishment for punishment's sake. It's punishment for the sake of our spiritual growth. Why do parents punish their children sometimes? Any good parent will have to punish their children sometimes. Not out of cruelty, not because they're bad parents, but to teach their kids a lesson so that the kids will grow into the best possible versions of themselves. Right? If you're too lenient, you're not being a good parent. If you're too strict and harsh, not being a good parent. But there's a middle ground there. So this doctrine of karma, which has been created by God, God loves us. God is our parents. God is our all in all. So why would God create something that's not helpful to us? God has created this doctrine of karma, this law of karma, to help us grow morally and spiritually. Okay? That's why in one place, we'll talk about this in more detail tomorrow, because the talk tomorrow is about suffering, this big problem of suffering. Why do we suffer? And especially, how does Sri Ramakrishna answer this big question? If God is loving, then why does he make us suffer so much? And his direct answer is very beautiful. We'll talk about it in detail tomorrow. But when he's asked this question, he says, God has given us suffering, given us all these selfish qualities like lust and anger and greed. Why? In order to create saints. Mohat lok toyir korben bole. And we'll talk about that in more detail. But this idea is the evolutionary doctrine of karma. By encountering good and evil in ourselves, in the world, we grow and we evolve morally and spiritually. So this is what's called the evolutionary doctrine of karma and rebirth, which I think is defended by Sri Ramakrishna, Swami Medhananda, Sri Aurobindo, and others. And I think it's a more fruitful doctrine to adopt from a spiritual standpoint. As spiritual aspirants, I think it's much more helpful. Otherwise, Hinduism becomes a religion of fear. I'm doing good things because I'll be rewarded, right? But then that becomes kind of selfish at a higher level. It's a kind of karmic selfishness. I'm only doing good things to other people because I'll be rewarded in the future. That's a kind of spiritual hedonism in a way. We should do good for good's sake. That's the idea. We should do it because it'll benefit us spiritually, actually, not because we'll be going to some heaven as a result, even if it might be true. Okay. Now, as I said, I want to tackle some interesting questions. One question. Who or what is it that reincarnates? What exactly is the reincarnating entity? And I don't want to throw off the dynamic here, but I'm curious, do any of you have ideas? Just let's throw out an idea. Who or what reincarnates? What is the entity that is reborn? Yeah. The subtle body. Good. Good suggestion. That is one answer within Hinduism. Anyone else have other ideas? Or the same idea? What do you guys think? Subtle body? Jiva, very good. Okay, so one person, already we see these divergences. One person in the audience says, subtle body. What is the subtle body, by the way? The subtle body is, a simple way to put it is, it's the mind, okay? In Hinduism, the mind itself is insentient. It's a subtle form of matter. This is a grossly physical body. The mind is a subtle body because it's a subtly physical form of matter. Okay, we can't see it under the microscope, but it's still matter. And so it's still insentient. So she's suggesting that it's a subtle body that reincarnates. And we have another person in the audience who says, what about the jivatma? Maybe it's a jivatma that reincarnates. I recited that verse from the Bhagavad Gita about casting off our clothes. That seems to say that it's the Jivatma that reincarnates and not the subtle body. But then there's another verse in the Gita, in chapter 15, Shariram yadavapnoti yacha. I won't say the whole thing, but I'll just give the gist of it. It combines both these answers. It's very interesting. What Bhagavan Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita is that it's the Jivatma, the conscious individual soul, which at the time of the death of the physical body will take the subtle body along with it and go to whatever the next loka, and then the Jivatma, in association with the subtle body, will be reborn in another body. So now, the combination of your two answers is the Vedantic answer to the question. Who or what is the reincarnating entity? All the schools of Vedanta say the reincarnating entity is the conscious individual soul, the Jivatma, in association with the subtle body. Now, you might ask, well, why does it have to be in association with the subtle body? Because the subtle body is the repository of the samskaras, the latent mental impressions of everything we do and think and say in this life. That is stored in the unconscious, in the subtle body. So that means the Jivatma has to take that subtle body with it. And that's why none of us is born as a blank slate. You'll see, some of you are parents, right? You know that. If you have more than one child, you'll know that. No, children themselves they're born with all sorts of tendencies. They might be prone to being very optimistic or very pessimistic or depressed or this or that, prone to having a temper, a million things. Why? That's because of their purva janma samskaras, past life latent mental impressions. Okay, but now what's interesting is there are other traditions within Hinduism which give different answers to the same question. What is the reincarnating entity? The answer you gave, which is the subtle body, is the answer that Sankhya gives, one of the most ancient Indian spiritual traditions within Hinduism. Sankhya says it's the linga sharira. That's the term used. That just is a term for subtle body. There are two terms in Sanskrit for subtle body. One is linga sharira, the other is sukshma sharira. Okay? That is the subtle, and they say it's a subtle body that reincarnates. Now, there's a problem with that. And I discussed this in the book. When Sankhyans say that it's the subtle body alone that reincarnates, the problem that comes up is, well, wait a minute. But you Sankhyans yourselves, you say that the subtle body is insentient. It's not conscious. So just as it makes no sense to say that this table is a reincarnating entity, what sense does it make to say that something insentient like a subtle body reincarnates? See, because what is the whole purpose of reincarnation and all that? It means the soul is coming back, or there's some conscious entity which feels suffering. Because of that suffering, it takes to spiritual practice. And then ultimately it attains liberation, right? That's the journey of our soul. But the subtle body has no journey at all from a first person standpoint because it's not conscious. Only the Jivatma is conscious, right? So there are these complex issues within Hinduism, and there are a lot of debates about who or what is the reincarnating entity. Sankhya says the subtle body alone. Now Nyaya, so now we're really getting into the weeds here. Nyaya is another school of Indian philosophy which is not as well known. It's considered to be the kind of logical school of Indian philosophy. Nyaya sometimes even means, in modern Indian language, just means logic, reasoning. Nyaya. The Nyaya answer is it's just the Jivatma which reincarnates. We don't need they don't posit a subtle body. But then you might ask, well, then where are the samskaras kept? What the Nyaya school says is the samskaras are part of the Atma, part of this Jivatma. So we don't have to posit a separate subtle body. So you see, within Hinduism, there's a vast range of answers. Sankhya says it's a subtle body that reincarnates. Nyaya, on the other hand, says it's the Jivatma that reincarnates without the subtle body. And Vedanta says it's the Jivatma in association with the subtle body, which I like. I'm biased because I'm a Vedantan. But just so you know that there's a range of answers here, okay? And if you want the reference, Gita 15.8. Chapter 15, verse 8. Sharirain yadavapnoti yachapyutkramati ishvaraha grihitvaitani sanyati vayurgandhani vashayat. The jiva, the conscious soul, when leaving the physical body, takes along with it the subtle body. Just as the wind takes the fragrances from a vase. It's a very beautiful metaphor. This is Bhagavan Krishna explaining it with a metaphor. Just as the wind takes the fragrances from a vase, the Jivatma like that takes the subtle body from the corpse, the physical body that just passed away. Okay, now, another thing. You might ask, well, why should we accept this evolutionary doctrine of karma over the retributive doctrine of karma? I mentioned these two different ways of thinking about this karma doctrine. Why? Well, one reason, as I said, is that it's more beneficial from a spiritual standpoint, because primarily we're spiritual aspirants, right? And it helps us more as spiritual aspirants to think about the doctrine of karma as a doctrine of spiritual evolution. And another source of great consolation to all of us, we should all be relieved to hear this. If you believe in the evolutionary doctrine of karma and rebirth, the beauty of it is every single one of us will eventually attain the highest spiritual goal. Nobody will be left out. Not one soul will be condemned to an eternal hell, thank God. Okay? And I was about to say there's no eternal hell in Hinduism, but that's not quite true. Because there are some traditions in Hinduism which do believe in an eternal hell for some souls. I'm thinking in particular of Madhva's school of Dvaita Vedanta, Madhva Vedanta, because he distinguishes different categories of soul. And one category is Tamo Yogya. Very poetic, but very disturbing also. These are the souls who are destined for the darkness of eternal hell. It sounds like fundamentalist Christianity. And so, yes, some souls, according to Madhva, will end up in an eternal hell, but thankfully our tradition does not believe in this Ramakrishna Vivekananda tradition. And you see, this evolutionary doctrine of karma goes hand in hand with the doctrine of universal liberation. Universal liberation means every soul will eventually attain liberation. Why? Think about it logically. If the overarching purpose of karma is to help us to evolve morally and spiritually, and this doctrine goes hand in hand with rebirth, which means we get as many chances as it takes, as we need, to reach the highest goal. That means, let's say, in this life, I make a certain amount of progress. I am 20% of the way toward liberation. In my next life, I start from that 20%. It's like a savings account. Let's say I make $100 in one life. In my next life, I start with 100 in my savings account. How nice. I have a $100 balance. And then in my next life, I've got $1,000 as my balance. And then that's how we make progress. Bhagavan Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, Aneka janma samsiddhas tato yati parangatim, chapter 6 of the Gita. Having attained perfection through aneka janma, through many lifetimes, one eventually attains the highest goal, the supreme goal of life, which is liberation. This is such a wonderful doctrine. So it takes some of the pressure off, you know? It's not all or nothing, do or die in this lifetime. Like these one life only religions would say, if you don't get it right now, you're done for. You go to hell. No, not like that. We make some progress in this life, we'll continue in our next life. It's a long marathon, 26.2 miles. That takes many lifetimes. Now, the beauty of it is we get as many lifetimes as it takes to finally reach the highest goal. Every single one of us will finish this marathon. Now, there are some incredibly gifted people who will run the whole marathon at what's the fastest? I don't know, 5 minute per mile pace or something, maybe even faster, in the 4 minute range, I think. Other people, they might be going at the 30 minute per mile pace, 50 minute per mile. They might get an injury along the way. They might go backwards by accident. All sorts of things happen. But the beauty of it is, no matter what happens, even they will reach it in the end. I did one official half marathon my entire life. I'm a runner, so I run leisurely, but I did one official half marathon way back when I was doing my PhD at Berkeley. And it was a beautiful half marathon in the Humboldt redwoods forest, these giant, massive redwood trees with beautiful smell, amazing views. So this 13.1 miles, and I trained a lot for it. And I was going at a good clip, like 7:33 a minute per mile pace. It was not bad. And then suddenly at mile 11 or 12, suddenly I lose my steam. And I almost start doubting, I don't think I'm going to finish this. And then this lady happened to be jogging alongside, and she said, "Come on, you're almost there." And then just hearing those words somehow gave me that motivation to this finish. And then I went even faster, you know, and then I beat her. And then I thanked her after at the finish line. So that's what it is. We should all think, we are all souls here, every single one of us. And instead of seeing this world as a competition, we should try to help each other along. And this doctrine of karma helps us to see each other as kind of helpers. We're fellow travelers on the spiritual path. And there's no need for competition because there isn't like a seating capacity in the state of liberation. We're all going to reach there in the end. There's no rush, right? Okay. Now, let's briefly talk about some of the arguments for and against these doctrines of karma. We don't have much time, and I want to hear from you also. So I'm going to severely abbreviate this, and this is more of an incentive for some of you to buy this book. You can look in detail at the arguments for and against in chapters 3 and 4 of the book. Okay, so one of these arguments, it's called the argument from verified reports of past life memories. This is a hot topic these days because even in the West now, there's a researcher named Jim Tucker. Okay, he's published a lot of research on this. He's at the University of Virginia. He's a professor there. He's done really interesting work. And his predecessor, his name is Ian Stevenson. He's also done a lot of work on this. Now, I'll just give you one case, one example. A 2-year-old kid named James Leininger. At the age of 2, he has these nightmares, and he shouts these things in the middle of the night. Plane on fire, Mayday, Mayday, the plane's crashing, the plane's going down. And his parents are completely confused. What's going on? Okay, they started by just ignoring it, but these are recurring nightmares. And then one day they asked the kid when he was awake. They said, "What are you shouting?" He said, "Oh," and he said it very matter-of-factly. "Oh, I was a fighter pilot in my past birth, in my previous life. My name was James, Jim, I think he said. Yeah, James. So it's the same name, but anyway. So my name was James. I was fighting the Japanese in World War II. I was on an aircraft carrier called Natoma, Natoma. He gave that name, Natoma. He had a friend named Jack Larson. He gave all these details. His parents were bewildered. What in the world is this kid talking about? And this is pre-Google days. So his father goes to history textbooks, finds out that during World War II, there was a fighter pilot named James. He fought for this aircraft carrier. He belonged to this aircraft carrier called USS Natoma Bay. He had a friend named Jack Larson, and his plane was shot down in World War II. So we find these startling cases of verified reports of past life memories from these young kids. And there's so many, and they're spontaneous. And what happens is, after a few years, those memories tend to fade. By age 5, by age 6, by age 7, they don't really think about them anymore. And you might ask, well, why don't we have memories of our past lives? Thank the Lord we don't have memories of our past lives. There's a reason why God has withheld from us memories of what we did in our past life. Sister Nivedita once asked Swamiji this question. Why don't we have memories of past lives? And then Swamiji quoted Jesus. He said, "Sufficient unto the day is the evil thereof." We've done enough stupid things in this life. Let alone if we knew all the stupid things we did in our past lives, we would become emotional and mental wrecks. It's like, oh my goodness, I did that? So there's a reason. So, curiosity killed the cat. Now, one thing that's trending is what's called past life regression hypnosis. Some of you have heard of this. And I'm not criticizing it. It can be helpful to some people, but don't do it just as a kind of novelty or just for fun. Take it seriously if you really feel that it'll be helpful. Because there's a good reason why most of us don't have memories of our past lives. And so you're really opening a can of worms there if you do this. You have to be really careful about it. Okay. I'll mention very briefly another thing, really fascinating. And I'm teaching you a term which I bet many of you haven't even heard of, so you can impress your friends with this term at your next party. Xenoglossia. How many of you have heard of the term xenoglossia? Not one. All right, I got you. Good. Okay, xenoglossia. 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 Xenoglossia means suddenly somebody starts speaking in a language they never learned. It's very interesting, xenoglossia. Yeah, but you know the phenomenon. Exactly. Many people are familiar with the phenomenon. Let's say I'm a white American born and raised in the U.S., never learned a foreign language, and suddenly I start speaking Chinese. Just imagine. That's called xenoglossia. And there's some really weird cases of this happening. There's a woman, I think her name is Uttar Hadar. I talk about it in the book. Marathi, born and raised in Maharashtra. doesn't know a word of Bengali. Suddenly she starts speaking fluent 19th century village Bengali. And she doesn't call herself Uttar, she calls herself Sharada, like our Sharada Ma. And she doesn't respond to Uttar. Who's Uttar? No, my name is Sharada. And she's speaking in Bangla, Amar Naam Sharada. So weird. These are weird cases. And so Ian Stevenson, that predecessor of Jim Tucker, he did research on this case, and he concluded that the best, the inference to the best explanation is she was Sharada, a Bengali named Sharada, a village woman named Sharada in her previous birth, and so on. So there's a lot of interesting evidence for karma and rebirth. I have a lot more arguments that I discuss in this book in chapter 3, if you're interested. Now, what are some of the arguments against karma and rebirth? Well, one of them I already kind of vaguely alluded to, but now we can frame it as an objection. If karma and rebirth is true, why the heck don't we have memories of our past lives? Right? If it's true that I lived in the past, why don't we have memories? Now, part of the answer is what I already gave you. The answer is God has wisely withheld from us memories of our past lives so to help us morally and spiritually, because it can only harm us for most people. By the way, regarding past life regression hypnosis, there's an interesting book. Some of you might have read it. It's called Many Lives, Many Masters. Have any of you read that book? It's a beautiful book. It's a very interesting book. It's by Brian Weiss. Fascinating. And I actually mention the book here because you can also take some of these reports that you get, testimony that you get when they're under hypnosis as evidence for rebirth. One example is the woman that's the main subject. Yeah. What's her name? Catherine? Catherine. Young woman at the time. And what's fascinating is when she's put under, she speaks in her womanly voice, whatever, like a typical young American woman would speak. Suddenly, she'll speak with this hoarse, almost masculine, deep voice. Like it's really scary almost, like Darth Vader or something. And Brian Weiss, who's her psychotherapist, the hypnotist, the psychiatrist, he's stunned. He's like, what the heck? And she's not speaking as Catherine anymore. And he says, who are you? When she's speaking in that weird, deep, masculine voice. And this person now says, she's on the couch, but she's saying, I'm a master. There are these masters, that kind of guardian angel type figures that guide us in this lifetime. It's very interesting. And then that master tells him about certain details about his personal life, which she could not possibly have known because he never invited her to his house. That would be inappropriate, right? Because he's a psychiatrist. He's her psychiatrist. Talking about like a picture he kept on his room, a framed picture and so on. So he's astonished to hear these details. So indirectly, the data that you can get from past life regression hypnosis, some of that data can also support these doctrines of karma and rebirth, right? Like those doctrines that this woman under hypnosis is telling him things about her personal life, about his personal life that she couldn't possibly have known otherwise, which is evidence that the other stuff that she's talking about, and she had quite an adventurous, past lifetime and all sorts of stuff like I'm not going to go into the details, but anyway. So, but indirectly, the fact that she got those details right about his private life, personal life, supports the view that the other thing she says about her past lives is also true. That she was so-and-so in the time of Egypt and this and that is very interesting. Anyway, that's a book worth checking out. Many Lives, Many Masters by Brian Weiss. Now, how do Hindus respond to this objection? Why don't most of us have memories of past lives? Well, number one, look, just because we don't have memory of something doesn't mean that we didn't exist at that time. How many of us have memories from when we were 3 weeks old? We were all 3 weeks old once. Some of us a long time ago, but we were all 3 weeks old. How many of us have memories when we were a 3-week-old baby? Probably nobody. Does that mean that we didn't exist when we were 3 weeks old? No. Likewise, just because we don't have memories of our past births doesn't mean that we didn't exist in the past, in other bodies. Okay, that's the first line of response. Second, I've already given you the second response, which is thank goodness we don't have memories of our past lives. This is Swamiji's answer to Sitra Nivedita. Sufficient unto the day is the evil thereof. There's a good reason why we shouldn't open that can of worms. And finally, there's another line of response, which is that even though we don't have conscious memories of our past lives, everything we've done in our past lives is stored up here in the form of samskaras. And Patanjali's Yoga Sutras teaches us a technique called sanyama for recalling our past lives, what we did in our past lives. By concentrating intensely on those samskaras, those past life samskaras, we can do it. Now, should you do it? Don't all run home and try it. Don't try this at home, folks. Okay. This is meant for advanced yogis and people who, we do a breakfast reading, 5-minute breakfast reading in our Hollywood Center. And we're reading Reminiscences of Swami Medhananda now. And there's an expanded version of it now, by the way. It's like double the length. It's beautiful. And we were just reading a reminiscence where a householder devotee comes to Swamiji and he receives initiation from Swamiji. And Swamiji just touches him, this gentleman, young guy. Just from touching him, he understood what he was in his past birth, what his Ishta Devata was, and then gave him the mantra based on his Ishta Devata. This is the true guru, actually, the one who can read into our souls. So see, it's useful to have knowledge of other people's past lives. If you are a Jagat Guru, if you're a great saint, if you're a yogi, then you can use it for the benefit of mankind, of humanity. But ordinary people, better not to pry open that can of worms, okay? Another example, another objection that's quite common, the population explosion objection, the thing that I mentioned earlier. Well, okay, look, you're saying that there's karma and there's rebirth, but how in the world do you explain the fact that just a few decades ago, the human population was much smaller than it is now, and day by day the population is increasing. It's been almost exponentially increasing for a long time now. How do you explain it? Where are all these souls coming from? Interesting question, right? What is the standard Hindu answer to this? They appeal to two doctrines. Well, how would you answer this? I'm actually curious. How would you answer this? As a Hindu, if somebody were to ask you this question, how do you answer? Very good. That's part of the answer. Exactly. And Swami Vivekananda was one of these Hindu thinkers that made this answer explicitly, but in a very striking way. I'm going to quote directly from what Swamiji said. He said, "It is a significant fact that as the human population is increasing, the animal population is decreasing." The animal souls are all becoming men, he says. This is very interesting. Have you done a census on all the non-human animals as well? No. We know that the human population is exploding, but what about the population of mosquitoes? And Indians will say that that's increasing. I lived there for 13 years. I know for a fact. I think I even got dengue. So this is one part of the answer. There's another part of the answer. Can anyone guess? So that's one part of the answer, but this is a two-part answer. What is another important part of this answer to this population explosion objection? That's an interesting thought, but that's not what I was thinking, at least. The other crucial part of the answer is, this is not the only realm in which souls reside. Souls reside in other lokas. There's so many lokas. Bhur, Bhuvaswas, Tatsavitud, the famous Gayatri mantra. And there's 7 lokas. And there's so many, Puranas, they have 7 above, 7 below, and so on. So many lokas. So, like we have 7 continents here. Just imagine, there's so many lokas where souls are. There's so many souls which are not on earth right now. There are several verses in the Gita which talk about prapya punyakatan lokan ushitva shashvati samaha shuchinam shrimatam gehe yoga prashto bijayate. If you do good karma, what happens? You dwell in these temporary heavens, svargas, and you exhaust your good karma. It's really wonderful there. Everything is great. The only problem is you can't stay there. And then once you exhaust your good karma, you have to come back. Now, that means that right now, at this very moment, we're here. But there's some fortunate souls who have done good karma who are in these punyakatan lokan, who are in these lokas for people who have done good karma, where they have very positive experiences for long periods of time, but then eventually they have to come back. And the opposite is also true. People who have done bad things, they're temporary hells. There's no eternal hell, thankfully, but they're temporary hells. What is the purpose of these temporary hells? To exhaust our bad karma. So Hitler kind of people, they go to these temporary hells. Not very pleasant, right? But eventually, after they exhaust the bad karma, they come back and they haven't fully exhausted it. He might be one of these mosquitoes. Who knows? Who knows? They're all in their own journey here, okay? But the point is, souls dwell in other lokas as well, which means when the human population is expanding, exploding, the souls can also be supplied from these other lokas, from these temporary heavens, from these temporary hells, and so on and so forth, Okay, Pitraloka also, which is where our ancestors go, and so and so. Okay. Now, I want to get to this because this is very important, and then I'll wrap it up, and then I'd like to hear from you. How in the world is all of this, is any of this relevant to us as spiritual aspirants? So some of you might know, if you follow my classes on YouTube, I've been teaching a class called Bhagavad Gita in the light of Sri Ramakrishna. Okay, this is not the way that the text is usually taught, actually, even though Swami Medhananda explicitly said that we should reinterpret the Vedantic scriptures in the light of the life and teachings of Sri Ramakrishna. Almost nobody does it. Not even most of the monks of order, as far as I'm aware. So I'm one of the first, as far as I'm aware, to be teaching a class not using Shankara's commentary, but using, unusually, Sri Aurobindo's commentary called Essays on the Gita. Why Sri Aurobindo? Why not Ramakrishna? Because Sri Ramakrishna didn't write a commentary. Why not Swami Vivekananda? Because he didn't write a commentary on the Gita. He gave little interpretations of verses here and there, but he didn't give a full commentary. Nobody as of yet has written a full-length commentary on the Bhagavad Gita from the standpoint of Sri Ramakrishna. God willing, Thakur willing, maybe I might write that in this lifetime, or maybe it'll take another lifetime to do it, Lord knows, or somebody else will do it. We have to see. But I got the ball rolling with this class. It's been a really rewarding class. I have brilliant students, both in person and online, people from around the world. And you can also join if you're interested. And all the classes are archived on my website, swamimedhananda.com. And you just go to classes in Bhagavad Gita and Light of Sri Ramakrishna. You can catch up and you can, there's a fair warning, because I have those academic samskaras. I assign homework. So I have study questions and homework, and then I make Google Forms, and they respond. They give the answers through Google Forms, and then I read through them before the next class, and I talk about them. So it's a really fun class. So when we were talking about the doctrines of karma and rebirth in the Bhagavad Gita, in chapter 2 of the Gita, that beautiful verse I mentioned earlier about casting off our worn-out clothes, I asked this question. If you believe in the doctrines of karma and rebirth, how does it help you in your day-to-day life, in your day-to-day spiritual practice? And I got some extraordinary answers, and I want to share some of them with you. And I'm sure, and I'd like to hear from you also. So one thing, one of my students said, the doctrine of rebirth is a great solace when it comes to how I view mortality. I used to fear death for myself and my loved ones, but the doctrine of rebirth has helped to ease it. Just think about it. It can be a revolutionary change in your outlook. If you really believe in rebirth, when you lose somebody very close to you, yes, it'll be sad, but knowing that that person has not died, actually, what an extraordinary thing. If you really believed it, if you really believe that the soul is just moving on to it and eventually will be reborn again, how bad will you feel, really? You'll miss the human person that was here for some time, but the soul lives on for an eternity. What a wonderful source of consolation. That's why that verse that I read earlier is one of the verses that's recited during Hindu funerals, to remind the people mourning the death of a loved one, don't worry, he's just casting off that physical body, like a pair of worn out clothes. That person lives on. Okay. Now, other examples. Another student says, the idea of karma helps me to not lash out at God when things are not going well, because I understand there may be a karmic element, which ultimately leads to more equanimity and surrender. Again, very powerful. Practical consequence. We should take responsibility for our actions. And, a lot, especially these days with this kind of, what do we call it, safe spaces and trigger warnings. And it's like where people expect to be coddled all the time. And what happens as a result is people assume a kind of victim mentality. Oh, poor me. The world is against me. And it's like a source of depression. And you feel bad for you. And you blame this person and that thing and that thing for your current situation. The doctrine of karma says, take responsibility for yourself. It's a very empowering doctrine, actually. Whatever happens, we'll get to the Q&A in a second. Yeah, just a second. We'll get to that. Let me just finish up. And just keep it in mind, and I'll get to you in a second. Yeah, exactly. Keep it as a samskara, and then we'll get to it in a second. Okay. Another example, another one of my students. Karma and rebirth also help to provide a framework for my understanding of myself. I used to feel odd that I seem to be more spiritually minded than many of my peers and that I'm so attracted to spiritual philosophy. The idea that these interests may be a result of spiritual interest in past lives helps me to embrace these aspects of myself and understand them as a natural continuation, not a single life obsession. See, instead of, we're born with certain tendencies, certain temperament, certain personality traits. Why? We can see ourselves on a long spiritual journey, and we can better understand ourselves as a result. If we accept this doctrine of karma and rebirth, we're not just freaks of nature that are born with these genes. Scientists these days talk about genes. But the doctrines of karma and rebirth go much deeper. They explain why we're born with certain tendencies and how it can help us in our spiritual life. How do we follow our swadharma? That's a beautiful term used in the Gita. Swadharma. Understanding that what we did in our past lives is directly affecting our personality in this life will help us to discover that swadharma, which will help us serve God and to make spiritual progress to the best of our ability. And another example. Many of you are parents, as I assume. A student says, I think karma and rebirth have changed my views about raising children. The idea that I am nurturing a soul that has been here many times and is on its own specific journey helps me to view parenting with more of a stewardship and guidance lens and not a possessive mentality. Especially important for you Indian parents out there, because at least, one of my Indian parents was quite possessive, and not possessive, that's not the right word, but typically Indian in a certain way. You have to study computer science. And so I had to major in computer science at Berkeley, and then after 1 year, I changed my major, thankfully, to English and philosophy. And see, the rest is history. Now I'm writing books on karma and rebirth. See? See, Dad? Okay. So I'm grateful that I disobeyed my dad. Let me continue this student's response. He says, I see no need to create a carbon copy, shape a child completely to my own ideals, or save them from eternal damnation. I understand that a soul may have chosen me. He italicizes these. I understand that a soul may have chosen me to help them along in this part of their journey. It's a subtle but powerful shift. It's a beautiful comment. I mean, it can actually completely transform the way you think about parenting, the way you're raising your children. Stewardship mentality. It's possible that the soul of the child chose you as his or her parents to help them along in their spiritual journey. But that means it's important not to be rajasic as a parent. I talked about the 3 gunas, I think a year ago when I was here. And I distinguished different parenting styles. The rajasic parenting style is helicopter parenting. You hover over your child. You have to do X, Y, or Z. And I'm a scientist, so you have to be a scientist. And you have to do this. And you micromanage, and that's called helicopter parenting. Rajasic, very rajasic. The ideal is sattvic parenting. This guy is a sattvic parent. And these doctrines of karma and rebirth have helped him to be a sattvika parent. That means what? You love your child. Of course you love your child. But without hovering over the child, you let the child grow into his or her best self, the best version of themselves, right? You're not trying to mold them in your image. You're helping them to grow into their best possible self. That's the idea, okay? So the doctrine of karma and rebirth can really help us in that journey. So now just coming back to this marathon metaphor, we're all on this long 26.2 mile journey. Some of us are just starting out. Other people are at mile 2, other people at mile 5, other people at 25. Every single one of us will reach the finish line in the end. So instead of, jostling with each other and trying to outdo the other person, let's try to help each other along. Thank you. Jai Ma. Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Tat Sat. Shri Ramakrishna Parnamastu. So yes, let's start with this gentleman here. Is there a mic that we can use? Yeah, that'll be better. So the online people can also hear you. Just please wait 1 second. Yeah. Yeah. Just 1 second, please. Yeah. No. Yeah, we want the online people to hear you. So. Okay, it's coming from the back. Yes, and please tell me your name first.
To me, chapter 18 of Gita.
Yeah.
if I look at those 76 verses and I derive a conclusion, this is what I find. It defines the criteria to get to him, certain characteristics. I'm not worrying about 70 other chapters.
You're not worrying about
Yeah,
what, sorry?
and then he says, only thing I find, how do you move from tamas to rajas to sattvic state? And there are certain behaviors. And they relate to three things. Don't get angry.
Sorry?
Don't get angry.
Don't get angry. Okay.
Anger, don't get
I'm
angry.
hearing you. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Don't hate,
Yeah.
and delusion.
Delusion. Yeah.
And then the thing of it is, if you made a mistake, see, I made a mistake. In my experience, I find only two types of people in the world who do not know I'm sorry and have inflated egos. So I find the message from Gita is only one for me. Very simple. Have faith. Number two, don't hate.
Yeah.
No greed and no delusion, followed by the consequences. And that is the third, the output, and that is love.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Love.
Thank you. Do you have a question or?
No, I'm just saying, honest,
Okay.
you spoke you stirred some thoughts in my mind.
Oh, good. Okay. But
mean,
you don't have a question, but that's
Yeah.
a good point. Yeah. So yes, Bhagavad Gita, one of the main takeaways, one of the main messages is try to be as sattvic as possible. I gave a whole talk on that, I think last year when I came here. So you can look up that talk. And Sri Ramakrishna, he said, what is the meaning of the Gita? Repeat the word 10 times. Gita, 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 Gita. What happens? Tyaga. The essence of Gita is renunciation of selfishness, renunciation of rajasic qualities like anger and delusion. And then we can. Thank you so much. Next question. Anyone else? Yeah, we have a lot of questions. So yeah, next question. Thank you so much. We'll talk later. Yeah, thank you. Okay, Ian, nice to see you.
Hey, good to see you.
Yeah.
Thank you for your class, by the way. And I guess something I was thinking on was how does one catch certain characteristics, as you said, habits, right? Habits form your character. What is one way to find that's been holding you back, say, in past lives or even current lives? What would be something or a practice to implement?
Yeah, sure. That's a great practical question. It's a very important question because, people struggle with things like addictions, depression, anxiety, and all sorts of, mental health issues and substance abuse addictions and various things, right? Swamiji gives us beautiful, let me read you the passage. I mean, because I had limited time, I didn't read it, but let me read you because he says it so nicely. 1 second. Okay, no, I'm not able to. Okay, anyway, the point is, you can counter bad habits with good habits, right? Even though it might feel like we're kind of like nobody is fated to be something. Do you see what I mean? It's just, yeah, you have tendencies. You have you might be prone to something like anxiety or depression. Why? Because of what you did in a past life. So number one, don't feel sorry for yourself. Take responsibility for it. That's the first step. That's important, actually. That itself is empowering. And then the next step is, now I need to cultivate counter habits, right? Do things that directly counter those bad habits or those negative tendencies or those negative thought patterns, whatever that might be. In the Yoga Sutra, Patanjali calls this pratipaksha bhavana. Whatever it is that you're struggling with, cultivate the opposite. If you're constantly judging other people, try to practice loving kindness. In Buddhism, that's called metta. It's a kind of loving kindness practice. Try not to see the faults in others, as Holy Mother Sharadadevi used to say. Right? So try to cultivate the opposite quality. Now, what happens when you do that? Every time you think a good thought, you do a good deed that counters that bad quality, that produces new samskaras, that carves new traces in the brain, okay? And in the subtle body that you're talking about. And then what happens? You'll be more prone to engaging in that same kind of good behavior in the future, right? In the beginning, it'll be really hard, right? That's why in Bhagavad Gita, there are different kinds of sattvic, of happiness, sukham, based on the 3 gunas. Tamasika happiness, Rajasika happiness, Sattvika happiness. And Rajasika happiness is the happiness of all instant gratification. And it says, in the beginning, it's like nectar. In the end, it's like poison. And Sattvika happiness is exactly the opposite. In the beginning, it's like poison. It's very painful. We don't like it. In the end, it becomes like the greatest nectar. And so like that, if you're struggling with some kind of whatever it might be, whether it's a mental health issue or some kind of addiction, start engaging in the opposite kind of behavior, the counter habit. Start to develop that. In the beginning, it's not going to be very pleasant. And it might even be difficult, challenging. You don't really want to do it. You're pulled in the opposite direction. But the more you do it, the more samskaras you're creating in the mind. And the easier it'll be in the future to continue with those habits until what happens? The good things become a habit. And the first thing you want to do when you wake up in the morning. So one of these great habits that therapists and psychologists and psychiatrists recommend to people with mental health issues is regular physical exercise. That's just one example. That's a great counter habit. Because depression is fundamentally tamasic. It's having a low self-esteem. It's having a kind of a darkened worldview. The glass is always half empty and this kind of thing. Get up out of your bed, run. Go run outside, swim, go for a hike, do regular physical exercise. And what they're finding is, they've done a lot of studies on this. What scientists are finding is that regular physical exercise is more effective in cases of mild to moderate mental health issues, especially for anxiety and depression, more effective than prescription antidepressants, prescription medicines in helping these people alleviate their mental health symptoms. It's remarkable. Just regular physical exercise. So that's one example of many. In the beginning, if you're not used to exercise, getting up and going for a half hour or 1 hour jog, not the most pleasant thing in the world. But if you do it every day for 2 months, I can almost guarantee you're going to look forward to getting up in the morning. Because the body also adjusts and the mind also adjusts. And then you start producing these endorphins almost immediately. The moment you start getting out there, you put on your running shoes. It's honestly some of my best ideas. Some of the best ideas I have for books and for my talks come from jogs, long jogs, and from swims. You know, because this gets into a different discussion, but it's called the default mode network. What happens is when you're not consciously thinking of something, often what happens is you activate the default mode network in the brain. And then you start coming up with the most wonderful ideas about your projects and this. And that's why many people, if you're in the shower humming a tune, suddenly you'll come up with some great idea. Like, that's how you solve this equation. You're not consciously directly thinking about that problem, but the answer comes. So that's because of the default mode. Anyway, that's a different discussion. So other people, thank you for that question. I hope that answered. Yes, so next person. Please tell me your name first.
Hi, my name is Elizabeth, and thank you so much for tonight's talk.
Thank you, Elizabeth.
Really appreciate it. I've been just doing a lot of reading, mostly with Swami Vivekananda's work, and thinking a lot about reincarnation and how it works with identity. And my question is, like, the way that it's written and the way that I hear it talked about is that it's one soul or one entity that moves from life to life. But that to me doesn't make a ton of sense.
Okay.
If that's the case, then that's so focused on identity, when I thought the point was that you as you don't really matter because I and you are the same. Right. So could it be that it's more fragments that when there's death, then fragments recombine and become another life? Okay,
this is a very deep and sophisticated question, so I welcome it. It's very good question. Okay, look, so there are a few things I talk about in the book which I didn't talk about in the talk, but which are relevant here in answering your question. So first of all, okay, I mentioned that both Buddhists and Hindus believe in karma and rebirth, right? But they disagree on one fundamental issue, which is the one that you're asking about, really. Hindus say, yeah, there is a unitary soul that is reborn from birth to birth. And it's the same entity. Buddhists say, for different reasons, that's not logical, it's not rational. And so long as we cling to this identity, we're going to be stuck in bondage. Nirvana means freeing ourselves from all kinds of limiting identities. Okay? And so Buddhists don't believe in an eternal soul in the Hindu sense. They have the doctrine of anatta. Anatta, Pali, it's a Pali corruption of the Sanskrit term atma. So anatma becomes anatta in Pali. No self, the doctrine of no self. Okay, so it sounds like your intuition is kind of more leaning on the Buddhist side here. Now, Hindus, but to clarify what the Hindu position is, it's really important. In this life, I happen to be Swami Medhananda. Now, when I die, is it Swami Medhananda that's going to leave the body? No. It's the soul of Swami Medhananda that leaves the body. Is the soul of Swami Medhananda identical to the Swami Medhananda that's speaking to you right now? No, absolutely not. Swami Vivekananda, in his lectures on Vedanta, he will often say, our bondage is that we identify with this little I. And he will use this expression, things like Mr. and Mrs. So-and-so. That's the identity that keeps us in bondage. Okay? See, Sri Ramakrishna himself says, well before we realize God or the non-dual self, all these big things, which is a spiritual goal of life, he says that it's absolutely crucial. It's necessary to first realize ourselves as a jivatma separate from the body-mind complex. He says this in the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna. He says, he uses the Shat Chakra, the 6 chakra paradigm, and he says that most of us, worldly people, their consciousness is focused on the 3 lower centers. Okay? The first meaningful and significant spiritual experience is when consciousness gets elevated to the heart center. And the sadhaka, the spiritual aspirant, has a realization of the jivatma in the shape of a flame. He uses very specific language because he had this realization himself. He's explaining it. He says, you realize the jivatma in the shape of a flame, and the sadhaka says, eki, eki, which means in Bengali, what is this? What is this? It's a wondrous realization. After millions of lifetimes, so many lifetimes we've been identifying with the body-mind complex. Now suddenly we realize that we are an eternal soul separate from the body-mind complex. And now when you're asking this question, now in our deeper essence, we are that jivatma. The same jivatma across births. But this is not limiting. The idea is that now in different Hindu traditions, there are different ultimate answers. The bhakti traditions, the devotional traditions, they say that same jivatma in the state of liberation is a liberated soul dwelling with the personal God in a higher loka, in an eternal heaven. Now, Advaita Vedanta, the non-dual school of Vedanta, they'll say, I don't really like that vision, that kind of ideal. It sounds boring. So long as there's duality of any sort, that can't be the highest. So we don't believe in an eternal heaven of that kind. We believe in becoming sugar, not eating sugar. Sri Ramakrishna will distinguish these 2 paradigms. The bhakti paradigm of heaven, of liberation is you live for an eternity in an eternal heaven with your personal God as an eternally liberated jiva. Okay? And Advaitins say, this doesn't sound very nice to us. We want to become sugar, which means no coming and going, no dwelling in heaven. You just rest in your true nature as non-dual pure consciousness. Now that's another kind of identity as the non-dual self. But Advaita is going to say that's the opposite of limiting because it's yo vai bhuma tatsukam, says Chandogya. It means it's the infinite self. How can that be limiting, right? So there are 2 different Hindu kind of lines of response to the Buddhist objection that I think you're raising a something verging on the Buddhist kind of objection to the Hindu view, which is that so long as we identify with something that's enduring across lifetimes, we're still kind of limited in some way. We're limiting ourselves. And so there's the bhakti kind of response to it within Hinduism, and then there's the Advaitic response. And I gave you both of them in a nutshell. Okay, next person.
I'm Pushpa. In my marathon, as I go from the 24th and 25th mile towards the 26th, one of the things that I have been thinking of quite a bit is the concept that if I'm here to learn a lesson, a most important lesson to help my Atma progress, to help my soul progress, and knowing what I need, if I have chosen my life, I have chosen my spouse, I have chosen the way I live my life, is it possible for me to look back on it, to look at the threads of common experiences and common consequences of it, and back into, oh, so maybe I was here to learn these things.
Yeah.
Because that is why I keep getting this experience.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. That's a great point. And I think that's another very practical benefit of believing in the doctrines of karma and rebirth. We can look back on our lives and say those times when, at the time we were devastated because maybe we didn't get that job offer that we were looking for. Maybe we didn't get in the school that we were trying to get into. Maybe a loved one passed away. But we look back on our lives years later and we realize, wow, all of this fits into this. There's a synchronicity. There's a kind of, I get it. Like, that's what I was supposed to learn from this, There's one case I'll mention. When I grew up in Boston in a community, and I spent a lot of time with other Bengali families. And there was one Bengali mother who couldn't accept that her daughter was dating a non-Indian person, let alone not. See, Indians will prefer that you marry within your particular, like Gujaratis want you to marry a Gujarati and the South Indians want you to, or more conservative parents at least. So Bengalis will want their kid to marry another Bengali. So this is not only it's not non-Bengali, but just non-Indian altogether. And this mother couldn't accept it. She was an Orthodox Brahmin. And ultimately, she's diagnosed with terminal cancer. And it was on her deathbed that she came to accept her soon-to-be son-in-law and embrace him, take him into her arms. And, it was through that terrible suffering that she came to that insight, that realization that, I've been narrow-minded for too long, and I need to, this was her moment of spiritual growth. And it was through the suffering that she came to that realization. At the time, she didn't realize it, but it was at the very end that she realized it, right? So that's just one example. Swami Medhananda used to say, suffering is the great eye-opener. And this is a good example. As Swami Tapasanji, one of our past vice presidents, he used to say that when we're suffering, we should try to look at that suffering. We should try to change our perspective on that suffering by seeing it as viparita kripa. Try to discover God's grace in the form of that suffering. What is God trying to teach us through that suffering? There is definitely a reason for the suffering. There's no random suffering according to Hinduism. Everything is karmic. Everything is part of the divine plan. So I think that's in line with what you're saying. Thank you. Okay, so yeah. Back there, then we'll come this way. How about that? Yeah, okay.
Hi, my name is Ashmita Basu, and I'm from Kolkata, and I'm doing my grad studies in Colorado State University. So let me give you a brief background first. I'm an atheist, and my grandparents and my mother, they are the disciples of Ramakrishna and Sri Ranganathananda. I have a few questions which as I'm growing old, these things are coming in my mind. It's that Ramakrishna never said that you have to rigorously practice a particular religion to, go to a moksha. Mm-hmm. He has been very flexible. That's probably why I am here, being an atheist today. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So my question to you is that why does our mind keep on ruminating what we think as we have done wrong in the past? And how do you think that we can be liberated from there? And my second question is that in the society, in the Indian society, and if you go to typical orthodox culture of any religion, they talk about being pavitra and apavitra. Now, what actually determines that? Mm-hmm. I mean, I am a person who believes in karma, the work only. Mm-hmm. So, but I just want to better understand that how to get rid of this, what is white, what is black, and not being able to accept the gray or the false that I've made in past. Or we keep on making every day.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, okay, regarding the first question, how do we not ruminate so much on what we did in the past, which may not have been so great? Again, remember that psychological theory of karma that I talked about in the beginning, the psychological explanation, and also in relation to Ian's question, which is that no matter what you've done, every saint has a past and every sinner has a future. That's the idea. And whatever bad things we've done, we can undo them through good actions and through counter habits. That's the first thing. And the second question was, now I forgot. I always do this. When two questions are asked, I forget one of them. So can you say it very quickly again? Yeah. And then, okay. So it sounds like from the way that you framed the question that you're somehow uncomfortable with this idea of this black and white kind of, these actions count as good and these are bad. These actions will make us pure, these impure. Why are we trading in these dichotomies? That kind of question. Yeah. Okay. Look, there is a dichotomy there. I don't think it's a bad one. This is at least as a Vedanta I'm saying. Now, Swami Vivekananda, in Karma Yoga, he says, he brings up these traditional Hindu concepts of pravritti and nivritti. Okay, pravritti typically means leading householder life. Nivritti used to mean, in classical Hindu literature, means monasticism. You renounce worldly life. Okay, and what he says, he gave them new definitions, and he said pravritti means revolving, because that literally vrit, it means revolving. So revolving toward. Pravritti means literally revolving toward what? Ego, selfishness. And nivritti means revolving away from ego and selfishness. What makes us pure? Anything that helps us to diminish ego and selfishness. Anything that makes us more selfless. Anything that makes us less selfish. Right? And what makes us impure? Anything that makes us more selfish, more egocentric, more self-centered. So this is the Vedantic dichotomy, but I think, it's not that just because something is black and white means that it's wrong or bad. This is a case where it gives us clarity, actually. Thank you. And how about you? And then we'll get to Keshav. Yeah.
Hello, my name is Sharath. Thank you for the wonderful talk.
Thank you.
In the Gospel, Sri Ramakrishna, over and over, he says God is the doer, the instrument of his doing.
Yes.
Robert Sapolsky scientifically proves that everything just happens automatically.
Yeah.
Are we really doing any karma? Is it just happening? We're just witnessing things happening.
Okay. Wow. Big question. Okay. So this is a can of worms I chose not to open in the talk because that would be another talk. I've given multiple talks on this. You can look it up. If you type in Medhananda free will, you get it. Okay. So Robert Sapolsky, you mentioned him. He's a professor at Stanford who wrote a fat book called Determined that was just published like a year or two ago, where he's, as you said, he's trying to scientifically show that everything we do is causally determined by prior events. Okay. Now, you also point out Sri Ramakrishna. Doesn't Sri Ramakrishna also deny free will at the end of the day? And I think the answer is yes. And if you want a fuller answer to my understanding of Sri Ramakrishna's views on free will, I have an article on this, an academic article. It's called Hard Theological Determinism and the Illusion of Free Will, which you can find on my website. Sri Ramakrishna's answer is the following, okay? Because that's not a complete answer. So I have to give you his complete view. He says that from the ultimate standpoint, God alone is the doer. From the ultimate standpoint, we don't have any free will. But so long as we have not realized God, we cannot help but feel that we are free and therefore morally responsible for our actions. Are you following? Which means what? That means how many of us in this room have realized God? I can say for sure I haven't yet. Still working on it. Sorry to disappoint you. But, okay, now what does that mean? It means what? Theoretically, intellectually, I 100% believe Sri Ramakrishna's position. I believe he's absolutely right. God alone is a doer. Ami Jontru Tumi Jontri, one of his favorite songs from Ram Prasad. I'm an instrument, O mother. You alone are pulling the strings from behind. I'm just a puppet in her hands. I believe it. But do I really? Do I really? The moment I get up off this chair, do I really feel that God is working through me? No. Because you don't feel that until you realize God. In fact, Sri Ramakrishna says, in fact, somebody I met just before this, she said, I really like your emphasis on how Sri Ramakrishna defined Jivan Mukti. Because Sri Ramakrishna defines the Jivan Mukta, the one who is liberated while still in the physical body, as the one who knows that God alone is the doer. It's a very high state of realization to know that God alone is the doer. Intellectually, I can just, I can buy it, fine. Go ahead and try to live it. Try to live that insight, you're going to fall flat on your face. You will feel that you're the doer immediately. Now, interestingly, I don't know if you know this, but I was listening to a podcast interview between Sam Harris and Robert Sapolsky. Did you listen to this? And it's interesting because one of the few issues on which they differ is this. Because Sapolsky says, in Determined, he kind of follows the Sri Ramakrishna line, which is that I have spent my whole life intellectually proving that there's no free will. And yet, it's like David Hume, if you guys know about philosophy. David Hume felt the same way. It's like, no matter how much I intellectually tell myself there's no free will, I can't help but feel that I'm free. That there's this kind of fundamental conflict between head and heart in this way. And I can't resolve it. I still live as if I'm free. Sapolsky says. Sam Harris, interestingly, says, no, I'm over that illusion. My own take on it is I don't believe Sam Harris. I'm serious. I think he's kind of egoistic. I don't want to get in trouble for anyway, but but there's a strong ego there, and he prides himself on a spiritual practice and this and that, and he thinks he's overcome that. I don't really fully buy it, frankly. But anyway, so Sri Ramakrishna's view is you don't overcome the illusion of doership until you have realized God. And because in the gospel, somebody says, wait a minute, Sri Ramakrishna, you're saying that God is a doer, so doesn't that mean I can do anything I want? All the bad stuff? And then he quotes from Mahabharata, I do as God makes me do. Sri Ramakrishna smiles and he says, go ahead and try. If you do something bad, your conscience is going to prick you and you're going to feel bad about doing it. You cannot help but feel morally responsible for your actions. And he says, God has lovingly and wisely implanted in each of us the illusion of free will. And that sense of moral responsibility so that we wouldn't commit more sin. See, if we didn't have that feeling of free will and moral responsibility, we would be doing all sorts of even more, there's already enough terrible stuff in the world as is. This would be multiplied 1,000-fold if we were impure, immoral people running around thinking that we have no free will. So there's a reason why God has given us this sense of free will, the sense of moral responsibility. Is it true from the ultimate standpoint? No. But we're not at the ultimate standpoint until we realize God. Thank you. Okay, yeah. And Keshav, can we give the mic to Keshav? Yeah. Let's give everybody a chance, the ones who haven't asked a question. You've already answered one. Yeah. Asked one. Yeah.
Make it fast. So from a Western and Abrahamic perspective,
yeah.
I've often heard the objection, like you were saying, they think of karma as retributive. Mm-hmm. And the objection that gets raised is like, do we deserve our karma? And they say, I've heard someone say, like, I refuse to belong to a religion that blames a victim for their experience, right, or that blames a child for their cancer or something like that. So how do we navigate that in discussion with people who maybe believe differently? And then second from that following the do we deserve our karma, is there any randomness in regarding our circumstances?
Right.
And
or is everything determined
in the universe, or is everything determined by?
Yeah, no, these are great questions. And these are, there's a debate, a philosophical debate about karma and rebirth in an academic journal from a few years ago called Philosophy East and West, between Whitley Kaufman, who's a Christian who's arguing against the doctrines of karma and rebirth, and one of his main objections was the one that you framed, which is, boy, that's not a religion I want to accept, one that blames the 2-year-old who has cerebral meningitis or dies of cancer, or the Holocaust victims. You can just name, whoever the Pahalgam massacre, whoever. Is it really karmic? And, is that a moral doctrine to say that? And then there are answers on the other side from, in this academic debate, from Nicholas Trakakis, Monima Chadha, and Arvind Sharma, who is a very senior professor in Canada. And Arvind Sharma gives a really interesting analogy. He says, imagine you're a lung cancer doctor. You're an oncologist, and a patient comes to you complaining about lung issues. You check him, and you find out this guy's got lung cancer. And you ask about his history. He says, I'm a lifelong smoker. Now, is the doctor being immoral or cruel by telling that patient it's because it's almost certainly because of your lifelong smoking habit that you have lung cancer now. That it's massively increased the chances of you getting lung cancer. So in a certain sense, not that you deserve it, but that it's because of what you did in your past that you are now reaping the fruits of it and having lung cancer now. Now, that's part of what the doctor is going to say. But the next step, in the very next breath, the doctor will say, now let me, to the best of my ability, try to alleviate you of this suffering. And then he's going to give you the chemotherapy or the radiotherapy or the surgery that's necessary to remove the tumor and heal you of the illness. Okay? Exactly like that. The karma doctrine says we reap what we sow. So whatever suffering we're undergoing, you can trace it back to some karmic cause. Does that mean that other people should just let you suffer? This is one version of the objection, which is that, like, if I see somebody suffering on the street and I'm in a position to help that person, and if I believe in the doctrine of karma, Whitley Kaufman says, then the doctrine of karma says, let me leave that person to die because he deserves his suffering after all. I don't want to interfere in the karmic process. Who am I to interfere with that person's karma? So this is a fundamentally mistaken understanding of the doctrine of karma. That would be the response to these kind of, okay, why? Number one, the very fact that you are in a position to help that person, that poor suffering person, means that it's because of that victim's, that poor sufferer's good karma that you are in a position to help that person. You see, you have to see, we can't begin to fathom the workings of karma. Gahana karmano gatihi says, there's a beautiful phrase in the Bhagavad Gita. Gahana karmano gatihi. The ways of karma are incredibly abstruse and mysterious. We can't possibly, with finite minds, only God can understand the workings of karma. Yes, that person deserves their suffering. That's true. But we also ought to help them because we're in a position to help them. And it's their good karma that brings us into that position. And number two, if we are in a position to help that person and we don't, we accrue bad karma. We harm ourselves. Not only harming the other person, but we harm ourselves. Okay. And so for both reasons, it's very important so we can, on the one hand, yes, all suffering is deserved. Does it mean that we should let the person rot? No. The karma theory has built into it good reasons for us to try to alleviate the suffering of other people at the same time. And then now again, I forgot the second question. That always happens, yeah. Oh yeah, is any suffering random? Now, here's the thing. The answer really, if you go deep in the Hindu tradition, is it depends. It depends on which tradition we're talking about. Because there are some traditions within Hinduism which believe that everything, absolutely every thought we think, every word we speak, I lift up this glass of water, determined. Not, it's not even that I had a choice in doing that. No, everything is karmically determined. You know who says this, interestingly? Even though it might sound like it's extreme and frightening, Swami Medhananda. He literally says, as he's giving a lecture, he says, every thought I think, every word I speak, the very fact that I'm here now speaking to you, 100% determined by my past karma. So it's what philosophers would call a thoroughgoing karmic determinism. That means that it accounts for everything down to the tiniest details in our life. Somebody came to Ramana Maharshi once and said, boy, you make it seem as if everything is determined. What about this? Is this determined? And he goes, yes, by your karma. So he says it. And then he adds something which is a little bit confusing, and I talk about it in the book. Oh, my goodness, sorry. He says, the only freedom we have is the freedom to stand aside, something like that, which means the freedom not to identify with the body-mind complex and to identify with the Atman instead. But at the level of the body-mind complex, any karma at the body-mind level, 100% determined, is Swami Vivekananda's view, Ramana Maharshi's view, Sri Ramakrishna's view. But yoga philosophy, for instance, is one tradition, as far as I could tell, which distinguishes between certain things, certain life parameters, certain areas of life that are determined by karma. And it specifically says jati, ayu, bhoga, these three things. Jati means what species you're born into. Ayu, lifespan. Bhoga, the particular mix of favorable and unfavorable, pleasant, unpleasant, positive and negative circumstances that you encounter in your life. These three things. But that there are a number of things, and especially a lot of these details, which are not karmically determined. But again, where you draw the line gets complicated. And then I think there are probably different commentators within the tradition of yoga which will have different views on this. But there are some traditions within Hinduism which don't say that karma determines absolutely everything, but only like the big things, maybe, the big picture things, and that the small picture things and the small details we still have some control over. Okay, great. Very good. Okay, Swapnama. Wow, we still have a lot of questions, and it's 9:14 already. Okay. Okay. All right. There you go. In this life, he's your husband.
Okay. So the theory of karma and reincarnation that you have explained.
Is that we are?
The theory of karma and reincarnation that you have explained has an underlying assumption that someone somewhere is keeping an account of everything that we are doing.
Yeah.
So could you talk to us on that?
Yeah, great. Great question. Again, this is where different traditions within Hinduism differ a little bit. There are some traditions of Hinduism which do not believe in God. They don't posit a God. Sankhya is one of them. But they believe in karma and rebirth. So now how do they explain this? Who keeps the books? Who's the bookkeeper? They don't give an answer. They say that it's like a self-running law somehow. Now, how that works, problematic, I think. And then Vedantins will argue against the Sankhya position. Vedanta says you have to posit God as karma phala data. God is the bookkeeper. God is the one who, because you have to be, this has to be a supreme being who is omniscient and omnipotent in order to pull this off. How do you know everybody's karmas and what they've done and not done unless you're omniscient? And how can you distribute each person's karma perfectly unless you're omnipotent at the same time? So you have to be God in order to fill that role. And so Vedanta posits God as the karma phala data, the one who distributes to each of us the karma that we deserve, basically. Yeah. And there are other traditions which don't posit that, but then I think they run into philosophical problems as a result. Buddhists, of course, don't believe in God as karma phala data. So arguably, the Buddhists run into a problem there. Then how do you explain how every person gets exactly the karma they deserve? These are complicated debates that have been going on for centuries. And you can look at the scholarship if you're interested. Okay, somebody else had, yeah, so yes. No, just take the mic. Where's the mic? How about you finish that out? You'll be the last question. And then, because it's already getting late, 9:17, and you can ask afterward. Yes.
Thank you, Swamiji. My name is Shakuntala. My question is regarding mediums and channels to connect with the deceased one, which provides solace.
Yeah.
So I believe in it, but my husband doesn't.
Right.
But it doesn't matter to me.
Yeah.
But I just wanted to know what your opinion is on that.
It may help certain people. I think it's better not to get too caught up in these things, because it can become morbid. It might kind of make you deviate from the spiritual goal and the spiritual path if you start thinking too much about ghosts and all that. Because the thing is, at the end of the day, people, when you lose a loved one, for instance, you miss that person. And so you want to somehow keep in touch with that person, right? So now the biggest thing is, or one of the big things is AI bots, AI versions of your deceased loved one. It's literally a thing. Actually, one of the students in my Gita class, Ellis, his name is Ellis Fowler, look it up. He did a 12-minute short film on this called #Anniversary about this interesting new phenomenon, which is that your dog dies, create an AI dog, exactly a replica, barking in the same way your dog barks, and then you can continue to, talk to your, not talk to your, but whatever, but, interact with your pet in that way. And the same thing with your loved ones, your deceased spouse and your deceased father, your deceased kid, and so on. But that's not going to help you make spiritual progress. You need to relinquish attachments, right? That's the spiritual aim. So these things, it may actually reinforce our attachments rather than help us to let go. And to that extent, it's not helpful in our spiritual life. That's the short answer. We need to wrap this up, I think, because there might be a book signing after this, or is that tomorrow? Do we know is it on both days or what? The book signing? Both days. So even today, if you want, we can do the book signing. And if you want to come tomorrow, we can do it tomorrow as well. So thank you very much for the questions. We'll continue the conversation later. Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Tat Sat. Shri Rama Krishna Arpanamastu.